The blizzard came without warning on a February night in 1888, transforming the Wyoming landscape into a white hell where visibility was reduced to mere feet and temperature plummeted to deadly levels. It was the kind of storm that killed indiscriminately, animals and humans alike, without mercy or distinction. Nahla had been running for 3 days. 3 days since the cavalry raid on her village. 3 days of fleeing through winter wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that she could somehow escape to safety. Her feet were wrapped in torn cloth that offered minimal protection. Her Apache dress, designed for desert warmth, was inadequate against the mountain cold. And her body, already weakened by hunger and fear, was beginning to shut down. She was 22 years old, and she was dying. The blizzard had found her in an open valley with no shelter, no fire, no hope. Nahla had walked until her legs would no longer hold her. Then she had collapsed into the snow, accepting that this was where her life would end, alone, cold, with no one to know her name or mourn her passing. She had stopped shivering an hour ago. Her hands were purple-blue. Her lips were frostbitten. Her breath was coming in shallow gasps. She was in the final stages of hypothermia, when the body gave up its fight and accepted the inevitable. Nahla closed her eyes and waited for death. Samuel Garrett had been heading back to his ranch when he realized the storm was going to be catastrophic. He had taken shelter in a small cave, barely more than a rocky outcropping, and was preparing to wait out the worst of it. He had food, blankets, and the kind of practical wisdom that came from decades of living in frontier conditions. But as the wind howled through the canyon, Samuel heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice. Human. Desperate. Crying out in a language he recognized as Apache. Samuel knew he should stay put. Heading out into the blizzard was suicide. No sensible man would abandon shelter for a stranger. No one would blame him for waiting until morning. But Samuel had never been a man who followed only what made sense. He had always followed what was right. He gathered blankets, left some supplies in the cave in case he needed a shelter again, and moved into the white oblivion of the storm, following the sound of that voice. He found her after 20 minutes that felt like hours. A small figure collapsed in the snow, barely conscious, her lips moving silently as if she was already speaking to the spirits of her ancestors. Samuel didn't hesitate. He wrapped Nahla in his blankets and carried her back to the cave, moving by instinct and memory through a storm that should have killed them both. The next 12 hours were critical. Nahla was in severe hypothermia, and Samuel knew that aggressive rewarming could trigger fatal cardiac arrhythmias. He had to warm her carefully, gradually, while keeping her conscious and monitored. He removed her wet clothing and wrapped her in every blanket he had. He held her close to his own body, sharing his warmth. He kept her conscious by speaking to her constantly, even though she couldn't understand his words. The sound of his voice keeping her connected to the world of the living. "Stay with me," he said over and over, his arms around her shaking form. "Stay with me. You're going to survive this. I won't let you die." By dawn, Nahla's shivering had returned, a sign that her body was beginning to fight back. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at Samuel with confusion and something approaching hope. "You saved me," she whispered in broken English. "You're alive," Samuel replied. "That's what matters." The blizzard lasted 2 more days. During that time, Samuel shared his food and water with Nahla. He tended to her frostbitten fingers and toes with the gentleness of someone who understood trauma. He spoke to her softly, learning her name, understanding that she had fled a cavalry raid that had destroyed her village. And Nahla, watching this man who had risked his life to save her, who continued to care for her despite her being Apache, a woman his own society deemed an enemy, began to understand something profound. That goodness existed in the world. That not all white men were soldiers. That mercy was possible. When the storm finally cleared, Samuel faced a decision. He could take Nahla to the nearest town, where she would likely be turned over to authorities or lynched by vigilantes. Or he could take her to his ranch, where he could provide protection and help her heal. "I'm taking you to my ranch," Samuel said simply. "You'll be safe there. You can decide what you want to do with your future. But for now, you're under my protection." "Why?" Nahla asked, her voice small. "Why would you help an Apache? Your people hate my people." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm not my people," he said finally. "I'm a man who believed that a human life, your life, is worth saving. That's all." The journey to the ranch was slow and careful. Nahla's feet were severely frostbitten, and walking was agonizing. Samuel fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, and he pulled her across the landscape, stopping frequently to ensure she wasn't in unbearable pain. When they arrived at the ranch, Samuel's hired hand stared in shock at the Apache woman being brought to their workplace. But Samuel made his position clear immediately. Nahla was under his protection, and anyone who treated her with disrespect would find themselves without employment. Over the following weeks, as Nahla healed, something unexpected developed between them. Samuel would sit with her, teaching her English, learning Apache words from her in return. He would tell her about his life, about his own losses and struggles. And Nahla would share her story, about her village, her family, her terror, and her survival. And gradually, the gratitude that had initially defined their relationship transformed into something deeper: respect, affection, and eventually love. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the porch of the ranch house, Samuel spoke words that would change Nahla's entire future. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because I rescued you, though I did, but because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you survived something that should have killed you. Because your courage and your kindness and your capacity to forgive a man for the sins of his people. That's extraordinary. I'm asking if you would marry me, if you would build a life here with me." Nahla looked at him, this man who had risked his life in a blizzard to save a stranger, and she understood that sometimes mercy is the truest form of love. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their marriage was scandalous. Society condemned it. Neighbors whispered. Some threatened violence. But Samuel stood firm, making it clear that Nahla was his wife and that anyone who harmed her would answer to him. Over the following years, Nahla became known throughout Wyoming not as the Apache woman, but as Mrs. Samuel Garrett, a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and dignity. She worked alongside Samuel managing the ranch. She became involved in the community. And most importantly, she became a bridge between the Apache people and the white settlers, using her position to advocate for a peaceful coexistence and fair treatment. Samuel never regretted the decision he made in that blizzard. He never questioned the choice to risk his life for a stranger, because that decision had led him to the love of his life. Years later, when people asked Nahla about the moment Samuel had found her in the snow, about the moment she understood she would survive, she spoke with the kind of clarity that comes from genuine transformation. "I was dying," Nahla would say simply. "I had accepted that death was coming. And then a man appeared in the blizzard, a white man, who by all rights should have left me to die. But he didn't. He risked his own life to save mine. Not because I was pretty or useful or valuable by any measure society recognizes, but because he believed my life was worth saving. That belief, that single act of mercy that gave me life back." She would pause, emotion visible on her face. In Apache culture, we believe that when you save someone's life, you become responsible for them forever. Samuel saved my life that night, and in doing so, he became my responsibility too. We saved each other. That's what real love is. Two people choosing each other, completely and forever, despite what the world says about them. When Samuel died at 84, Nahla was at his side. They had been together for 46 years. 46 years of proving that love can transcend cultural boundaries, that mercy in a blizzard can change everything, and that sometimes the bravest act is simply choosing to help someone when the world says you shouldn't. At his funeral, Nahla spoke about a man who had risked his life in a fierce snowstorm to save a woman his society deemed an enemy. He called it an act of mercy, Nahla said, her voice strong and clear. But it was more than that. It was an act of revolution. It was a refusal to accept the world's judgment about who deserves to live and who deserves to die. It was a choice, made in a blizzard, made with no guarantee of reward or recognition, to value my life as equal to his own. Through his brave act that night, he changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone he touched. He showed us that courage is not measured by physical strength or military might. Courage is measured by your willingness to help someone when helping costs you everything. Nahla lived for another 12 years after Samuel's death. She spent those years continuing their work, advocating for Apache rights, working toward peaceful coexistence between cultures, and most importantly, teaching people that sometimes the greatest act of courage is mercy in the midst of a storm. On her grave, 2 names were inscribed, Samuel and Nahla Garrett. Below them, simple words carved in both English and Apache. He saved her in a blizzard. She saved him by loving him. Together, they showed us that mercy transcends all boundaries. And in Wyoming, the Garrett Memorial, established to support cross-cultural understanding and commemorate acts of mercy, continued the legacy of a cowboy who had risked his life in a fierce snowstorm, and an Apache woman who had chosen to love the man who saved her.